Well, I want to introduce our speaker, Jewell Dunn, and she's drawn quite a crowd here. This may be near a record, I think, today. Jewell was introduced to genealogy early by her aunt and became more interested when she transferred to Utah with her employer in 1984. She's attended over a dozen institutes and seminars to extend her education in historical and genealogical studies. She obtained her Bachelor's of Arts in 2008, which included transfer credits from Brigham Young University. She also earned a Master's in Business Administration in 2010 and a Doctorate in Business Administration in 2015, which is now finally official, so we can celebrate and call her Dr. Dunn. She recently took a job at the State Archives in Olympia, and her main genealogical interests lie in Native American, German, and early Pacific Northwest research, and has recently been researching early history of the Brewery Schmidt family, which makes her a natural fit for us here at the Schmidt House in our Heritage Builders History program. So let's have a historic welcome for Jewell Dunn.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? So, I want to raise a hand. How many people have German ancestry? Pretty good showing. It's pretty much said that about 85% of the people in the United States have some type of German ancestry, whether it's very early or, a little bit later. What I'm going to be going over today is other records that you can find other than family records. Finding towns in Germany and former neighboring countries can take time and patience. Correlating maps and gazetteers can be very helpful in pinpointing the town of your immigrant ancestor. The first step is to gather different documents from various sources to list possible towns of origin. Second step is to locate towns on a current map. In some cases, the country may have changed around the person and they may have never moved. In Germany, it's probably one of the most difficult places to do research because the borders have changed constantly from war to war to war. So, and if you're really lucky, like Peter is here, your family chart has all been done for you. This is one of the just wonderful treasures that Karen shared with me that's in the archives here, and it does list the several generations of the family. So he's just very lucky to have this. It's just a wonderful little piece. One of the other things that they have here in the archives is they have just a beautiful collection of postcards. So a lot of times you can find clues from where your family came from on postcards because a lot of people sent postcards back and forth, from Germany. This is one of the schools in Worms, and then the postcard on the right was patterned after the dome in the school. So it's just very interesting. The postcard on the right was probably made right around turn of the century, 1900, 1905. But there is a treasure trove of postcards in the collection downstairs. And I mean hundreds.
Yep. Sorry, we're having a tough time hearing you back here.
Okay. Close to the microphone as you can.
Okay. Can you hear me now? All right. This right here is the birth of Leopold Friederich Ludwig Schmidt from 1846 from Dom, Assenheim, Germany. This is a blow-up. He was born the 23rd of January at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I want to share some of the records that I found. I want you to be able to see what the records look like close up. It's kind of hard to, see them from the screen. So I'm going to pass around Leopold's parents' marriage record and his grandfather's birth record. So you can see some of the way they're read. And when I was going through the records for Leopold's grandfather, one of the pitfalls that you want to really pay attention when you're doing German research is oftentimes there's lots of people by the same name in the parish records. And Leopold's grandfather had a cousin that was born just a couple months, and the wives had the same first name. and the fathers were very similar names. So you always want to make sure that you do double checking and see if there's other birth records, because there can be many duplicates. On my own Lorenz family, from 4 generations back from my great-great-grandfather, I have 12 out of the 16 people are the same last name because they intermarried. And some of them are cousins, and so it can be very confusing. So it's very good to have a chart. Make sure that you not only do your straight line, but do all of the people that might be in the family, brothers and sisters. It will be very helpful in your research.
Should I have a question?
Sure.
Large parts of Europe transferred from church and parish records to a centralized public registry record. Do German records ever transfer to that kind of system, or do you have to look for the particular parish?
There's civil records in all different places in Germany. You can't say definitively that all of the civil records are going to be in one time period. It's going to be different from region to region to region. And the best thing that I can tell you when you're doing German research is you really want to study not only the church in your area, you want to study the area itself, because it can be owned by one principality, a war goes on, and then somebody else wins over and they change it to their area, so it can change. And there's some civil records that start like in the 1810 to 1818. There's another time of civil records from about 1874, so you can't definitively say that yes, there will be civil records. The biggest thing that I can tell you is parish records, Catholic and Lutheran, are the best thing to start your research. And as I've shown you up here, this is a list of everything that you should exhaust finding the records in America first. Everybody tries to jump the pond a little bit too quickly. And it's really good to make sure that you've gone over a list and make sure that you've tried to locate every record on the list. When I was researching my own family, I didn't find the place of birth or the origin of my family for about 20 years. I had gone through everything on this list, and actually how I found it was on a state census record of a second cousin. It wasn't even my straight line, and I had turned every record I possibly could, but on this second cousin's state census record, over on the edge of the paper, it had a town that I could locate, and it still took a lot to find them.
I notice your list does not contain court records or lawsuits, because I've had some luck with that. Or somebody filed a lawsuit and this place of origin and those kind of things.
Sometimes you can, but typically, my great-great-grandfather got hit by a train because he was deaf, but it did not give a country of origin. It did give a list of his heirs, but sometimes court records can, but they're not definitive. Now this right here is a passport for Leopold Schmidt. If you're lucky enough to have somebody that traveled back and forth as he did to go to school and do some business, they have to get a passport to leave. Typically passports are not going to be earlier than the turn of the century. You're not going to find them like in the 1850s. You might get lucky, but typically the records get better as time goes on. Now here's a city directory of Leopold when he was the president of the Bellingham Bay Brewery, and it listed his home as Olympia. Now this is the naturalization of my own great-great-grandfather. Naturalizations that are in like the 1850 to about 1880 typically only give a country of origin, The reason I wanted to show you this, where it says the Grand Duke of Saxon Weimar, if you are lucky enough to have it narrowed down to a smaller area, the Grand Duke owned property that was more like the size of New Jersey rather than the country of Germany. So I could get it narrowed down to a much smaller scale. And sometimes you get lucky enough. You have to be really careful. For example, some people that are coming in from Canada, they'll actually have their birth country as England. And you have to be real careful for some of your ancestors that have come in through Canada, because if they drop off for a couple years before they're allowed to come in the United States, they might have their nativity as England instead of the actual country of origin. Because unfortunately, as time has gone on, they've closed our doors more than once, like they're doing today. So it's periodically they made people wait. Around the turn of the century, they made a lot of people wait in South America. So you might have some really strange areas where your ancestors were born, like 2 or 3 years of somebody in the family as they're waiting to immigrate into the United States. Now, I'm going to show you this case study of this. Oh, question.
Sorry. Are most of these records available online to anyone, or?
Yes and no. Germany is a very difficult country. There's a lot of...
Jewell, excuse me, but when somebody from the audience asks a question, could you repeat it so people in the back can hear what the question is?
Okay. The question was, can you find all these records online? I would typically say 50% of the records that I've shown you today have been online, 50% no. It just depends on the archives that hold them, whether they've given permission for them to be scanned. FamilySearch.org, which is the Mormon Church's equivalent to Ancestry, has been putting on between 600,000 and 1 million records a month. And if a lot of you here have not experienced working with FamilySearch.org, you can get it on it for free. Ancestry is a fee website, but FamilySearch.org is free. You can stay up until 2 in the morning in your jammies and search. So, and they're systematically going through different archives to make the records available. And they have to get permission when they go into an archive. For example, our Washington State archives, Family Search has been in there doing scanning of the records that we have, and they've gone through a lot of the records. Ancestry just put on the probate records for the United States, an index. They just put that on Ancestry. So there's a lot of things that are available, and you can go down to the Olympia Timberline Library, or you can go into a Mormon branch family history library and access Ancestry for free. But you can do FamilySearch.org. Like I said, you can make an account. It doesn't cost anything. But a lot of records, let's say that the records aren't available online, you can check a family history catalog to see if the Family History Center has microfilmed it, and you can rent the films for around $6 to $7 a piece, and you can view them at a local family history library. I've had to do the records that are going around of Leopold's parents' marriage from 1838 and the birth record of his grandfather. Those were all done at the Family History Center in Salt Lake. You can visit there and do research. It does not cost. It only costs when you have the film sent to a local Family History Center. And then I was able to copy those off the microfilm. But they're systematically going through Europe in different areas. And if there's an archive that has, you know, in an area, they've microfilmed them and then they're starting to scan them. And the Family History Center has close to, well, they have between 2 and 3 million films that you can view if you want to go do research in Salt Lake. And it's a pretty incredible experience. I've been there many, many, many times.
Now, Ancestor has a portion for international. Is that beneficial? You know, in fact, I think I paid for that at one time. The local ancestry.com, and then they have an additional international one that they charge.
Yes, if you're doing international research, it would be beneficial. But if you're only doing stuff in the United States, you're going to pay extra. But remember, FamilySearch.org does not charge a penny to be able to search, and they're putting many, many records.
Well, it wasn't beneficial for me, so I canceled.
Yeah, then I would try FamilySearch.org because they have really done an incredible job, especially in the last 2 years. They have really, they had a president of Family Search that was really into making sure they made things available for people in their homes. And with technology and the technology push in the genealogical community, there's so many things available. But not everything's available online. There is times when you have to write an old-fashioned letter in German and then find the records. Now, I'm going to go through this case study, and I had this person that I was doing research on, and all of his family records, like his Social Security application, said he was born in Murfreesboro, Illinois, which I knew wasn't true because he lived in New York. His parents lived in New York. They never lived in Illinois. One of the census records said that he was born in Missouri. He never lived in Missouri. So I had multiple records that were wrong. There was people when he died that wrote in his obituary that he was born in New York, and I knew that that wasn't true. So I would say that probably 50% of the records that I was finding for this gentleman were wrong. And many times, you know, we have to think about the context of when we're looking at a record and what's going on. You know, in World War II, it wasn't fashionable for somebody to be German or Japanese. You know, when there's wars going on, people don't necessarily want to tell people where they're from. World War I, you know, there's been times when, you know, America has kind of turned her back on people of certain ethnic backgrounds. So people weren't really wanting to tell people, yeah, I'm from Germany, you know. So this man, you know, in several records had written, and these were records that he generated himself. He should have known where he was born. I mean, his mother should have told him. So, you know, I had to look and look. This is a copy of his mother's death certificate, and one of the biggest clues from this death record, it gave her maiden name as Kreckmann, but I had no idea where she was from in Germany. So I started my journey on trying to find information about her. So I decided that I would need to look for her brother to see if I could find somebody by her same last name. Researching women is very difficult. In German women, it's even worse because, you know, it's...
I'm sorry, I thought I heard it all.
Boy, I thought I was really in trouble.
That is a heck of a sound, you know. I didn't want everybody to leave.
Right. Okay, now on this ship record for Conrad Grubmeyer and Sophie, Wilhelm, and Fritz, if you notice over to the side, and my husband took my pointer as a cat toy, so you have to excuse me. And this
Can
town
you
right
carry the
here-
microphone with you?
Sure.
Just pull it out straight towards you.
Okay. If you'll notice the town right here that they're from, it says Nienberg. And here's Conrad, 31, Sophie, 32, Wilhelm, 7, and Fritz, 2. And they came, dated 1888 when they came into America. And this is one of the clues of where we start, but it's still not good enough. Okay, then as I said, I had to find a brother so I could find out if there was another town where I could get a little bit closer. And this is Henry Krickman, and he came from right here, Stolzgenau, Germany, and a littler town called Dudinghausen. So there's another clue, because Henry lived very close to Sophia, so I figured that they had to be brother and sister. And it's really important to fan out friends, family, and neighbors. You can't just concentrate on just one person. I might as well keep this with me. Okay, here is a map. Here's Stolzgenau. Dudinghausen is up here, and Nienberg is right up here. And one of the reasons I always use a map, it's kind of like when you tell people that you're from Washington, they ask you which Washington first, whether it's DC or here. And most people, if you tell them that you're from Puyallup, they probably don't know where that's at. And you would tell them Seattle. So this person, this Henry Krickman, he told them Stolzgenau. It was a bigger town. If you notice that Conrad and Sophia, they told Nienberg, it's a bigger town. So you always want to get a map to kind of triangulate and see if the towns are close enough so you can correlate and get closer to where you need to be. In this map, it's even closer. The map that you looked at before is 1 in 200,000. This is 1 in 25,000. This has the bike paths. So if you notice Dudinghausen up here and Stolzgenau, we're kind of getting closer in. And here's the problem. There are 439 German districts, administrative units in Germany. The districts are at an intermediate level of administration between the land, the German states, and the local municipal levels and the Gemeinden or local government. This is why it's really important to narrow down and find from all the records that you can some towns so you can correlate and get it down to the smaller district. There's been so much war in Germany that you really have to know a closer town, a closer, larger place to be able to narrow it down. It's difficult to, if somebody says, hey, my ancestor came from Germany, can you help me? Well, you have to take it step by step by step. One of the best things that I use for finding towns is Myers-Orts and Verkehrslexikon. It's a dictionary of towns in Germany prior to World War I. And it says approximately 210,000 towns. And sometimes, like let's say that your ancestor said they were from Neustadt. There's like 45 Neustadts in Germany. So it's not like, you know, there's one Olympia, you know, in Washington. There can be that same name town in a bigger principality, so you have to be able to narrow it down. And see, that's why on my great-great-grandfather's naturalization record, it said the Grand Duke of Weimar. Well, that narrowed it down to a very small place. And actually, my ancestors come from one of those Neustadts. That's how I know how difficult it is. So in these Myers-Orts and Verkehrslexikons, they do have a set of these in the Olympia Timberline Library. When I was one of the board members, I asked that they get a volume to be able to have them there so people could do research. And it has a breakdown of the abbreviations of what all the little acronyms mean, and these are very important. And as you look up your individual towns, it gives you a breakdown. For example, I'm going to read it off the screen, but the ones I'm going to start with is up at the top here. In China, It's in the province of Hanover. The Standamp, or the kind of the county seat, is at Stolzgenau. They have an evangelisch parish. They have a Lutheran parish there, but they don't have a Catholic parish. And that would be important. If your family is Lutheran, then you would want to look there. If they're Catholic, they're going to go to church someplace else. Just because somebody says they're from a town doesn't mean they go to church in a town. If the Catholic church is 20 miles away, they may go from a 20-mile radius. There might be a Lutheran church there, but if they're Catholic, they're going to go 20 miles. So they may live in a town but go to church. So you can see how important all these little factors are when you're looking. And these are gazetteers that are held at the Family History Center in Salt Lake. There's about 20 of them for each province, and for East Prussia, West Prussia, and then of course, it's a little bit difficult when people think of Germany as it is today and what it was like when our ancestors were coming here in the 1850s and 1860s. Prussia went clear over to the Russian border. So your family can say that they were from Prussia. They could be from what is in the homeland of Germany now, or they could be from clear over in Poland or the Russian border. So narrowing down where they're coming from is a little bit more difficult. I will say one thing: if your family says they're from Prussia, they're not from Bavaria. Bavaria will not have a part of that. Bavarians are Bavarians. And these, all of these gazetteers that list all the towns and everything in all the provinces of Germany, they are on indefinite loan at the Family History Center up on Puget and U. I got them to be able to be there. So if you're ever doing any German research, you can access, they've been microfilmed and they are available there. And in each volume, they have a list that's alphabetical. And if you see the numbers to the right, it'll tell you which Standamp district, what page, and what town number they're in. And I know that this is probably a little bit confusing, and I'm going to break it down. The Kreis of Stolzgenau, which is the larger town I was showing you, consists, and there are over 48 littler towns. And as you go across the chart, it tells you different things. It tells you how many people lived in each town around the turn of the century. It told you how many were German, how many were Polish, how many were male, and how many were female. So they got down to the statistics. You know, it's not in every name, but it does narrow it down. And then on the right-hand side of the page, it tells you whether they were Lutheran or Catholic, where they would go if they were getting married or had to take care of business, what the Standamp is, or where the land office was. And then at the bottom of the page, in the individual numbers, these will coincide with a larger town, and these are the little hamlets, and that had one house with 2 people in it. This town had 7 houses with 45 people. So they narrow it down even more. So you can pretty much tell where your family lived. You know, sometimes when we get to America, there'll be somebody gets, you know, not liking what somebody else does, so they kind of branch off the church. You know, there's other denominations in Germany. Yeah, there's other denominations in Germany, but predominantly what you're going to see in the mainstream is either going to be Catholic or Lutheran. You can, even some of the Jewish people, they're going to go to just one church, and you're going to be, if there are records, then you're going to find them all huddled in one little place. And if they're Jewish, they're probably going to come from further away to go to church. They may come from 50 miles to go to their church. And so you're just going to want to do research. But for the mainstream, mostly Catholic and Lutheran, that's going to be the mainstream, and that's what you're going to where you're going to find the records. Sometimes you'll find Jewish records included with the Catholic, and they'll be upside down at the end of the books. That, you know, for whatever reason, I've had colleagues that were doing research, so it just depends. The Jewish Church has pulled most of their records from Family Search. They had at one time put on about 600,000 or 700,000 names, and because of the just because of what happened with the Holocaust, they asked them to take them off, so they did take them off. I know that some of the Jewish centers, you know, allow you to do research. So if your family is of a different denomination, I would go and, you know, seek out those records specifically. But most everything that has been microfilmed is generally Catholic and Lutheran. Now, after I did all my research on this gentleman, and I found out the town, we had the one ship record that said Nienberg, and then we had the other record that said Dudenhausen. And so I wrote a letter to who would be in charge of those two different churches, and I asked them if they had a marriage record for Conrad and Sophie Grubmeyer. And I got a letter back and said no, that I was actually kind of looking at the wrong place, that those records had been transferred to another church. And here is the email address. So I wrote another email to the next church, and the nice parish person there wrote me a nice email back that said, no, that was not the parish. They had been transferred once more, but that she knew that her friend was on vacation and that he would be back in a couple weeks. So she forwarded my email to him and to myself too. And 2 weeks later, I got this email back that said, yes, we have the records. They'd been transferred there, and they took me a scan, and I was able to have the birth record here of Heinrich Friederich Conrad Grubmeyer, and who is the father of Fred G. Meyer. And I'm sure, how many people have shopped at Fred Meyer? I worked for Fred Meyer for 41 years before I semi-retired and went to work at the archives. And it always frustrated me when I went up to meetings at the main office and they had it posted that he was born in Brooklyn, because I knew he wasn't. And that ship record, he was Fritz, who was 2 years old. And a lot of people don't realize that Fred Meyer had followed his brother. His brother had come out to Portland and had a restaurant in the Central Market in downtown Portland. And actually, Fred Meyer had decided he had started selling coffee in the 1930s and decided that he would come up to Seattle, and he married a divorcee, Eve Childs, and she had a little boy, and they actually were married in Seattle. He had come up during around 1914 to the gold rush and was going to go up to Alaska, got married to Eve on the way, but his brother talked him into coming back down to Portland, and they actually owned a couple of other markets before he started Fred Meyer Incorporated. So it's, you know, the Germans have a lot to do with the retail industry and a lot of businesses, and it does take a lot of work to find your ancestry. And I didn't even show you half or a third of what I actually had to do to find his birthplace. But Fred Meyer's father lived in Queens and in Brooklyn, and they're buried right in between. His uncle also had a grocery store, so he kind of came by it honestly before he started his grocery store. And the uncle, Kreckman, he also had a grocery store too, and I'm sure that Fred worked for him for a while in his younger years, and they came out to Portland in about 1910. So, and actually, by accident, as I was trying to find, when I was looking for Sophie, his mother, his grandmother's name was actually, or excuse me, his great-grandmother's name was actually Sophie also, and I found out she's buried in Brooklyn, but her husband was living in Ohio. And Fred Meyer's other extended family further back immigrated at a different time and actually are buried in Ohio. And the name, he changed the name from Henry Grubmeyer to Fred G. Meyer. And then the rest of his family is actually known as Grubmeyer with a P and Grubmeyer with a B. So it's, you can find extended family. Don't always just depend on just your line. Go and try to find the brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles, because it'll give you a wealth of information. Unfortunately, a lot of my ancestors died early. So I had to do research on other people because I couldn't find my Lorenz family. I worked on for 20 years, and it was just by a fluke that I was looking at this other record that I found the town where they were from. I wouldn't have been able to find a lot of information had I just stuck with a single line. Sure.
When I researched Dutch parish records, I found that several provinces had started to consolidate the indexes that made it a lot easier to find people. Have the Germans, or do the Germans plan on having an effort to start consolidating or creating special indexes so it makes it a little bit easier to find people?
Yes and no. You know what, the one thing that I have found when I have searched, but there's nothing that's definitively that happens in every area. A lot of towns have what they call family books, and they'll list, they'll have an index of the families, and it'll tell you where in the parish register that you can find the births, marriage, and deaths. But it isn't always definitive, and it isn't always in every area. And like, we have census records in the United States. Now, census records are very sporadic in Germany. If you go into the Mecklenburg area, they have them in 1819, but that's only in the Mecklenburg area. In the Hanover area, they have them like in 1851, 1861, and 1866. You really have to check the card catalog for the Family History Center because a lot of that stuff has been microfilmed, but it's not always the same for every area. And I can't tell you how important it is to use maps and gazetteers, because somebody can, if you're down in the like the Baden or Württemberg area or just on the Rhine River, that was French for a while. There's a corridor that went back and forth, so you can be in French records and then be back in German records and the person never moved. You know, in the case of one client, I did some research. We always hear the story of the 4 brothers or the 3 brothers. Well, I actually did find 4 brothers for him, and 1 stayed in Germany and 3 came to America. And he was lucky enough, this client, I found a 3rd cousin of his that had a diary when her ancestor came over, the 1 brother, and then my client was from a 2nd brother. 1 brother stayed in Germany, and I found somebody in Germany still living that descended, and I put them together so they email every Christmas. I get an email too. And then 1 brother was in the Civil War and died in 1871. But they came at 3 different times to America, and they never had contact after they came to America. And it would be 100 years later that I would put the ancestors together. And in this day and age with DNA has put a whole new face on genealogy. So I think a lot of people are able to put family units together. But not all of us are as lucky to have the wonderful records that are here in the archives. The Schmidt family is very fortunate, and they've been very gracious to have me come and talk today. It's been very nice. And
what is the current cost on DNA today?
You know what? It's if you can get it on sale. Sometimes you can get it on sale for $79, $89 a test. Typically, it's about $100. And they have 3 different type of tests. They have a Y DNA, which is the male. They have the mitochondrial, which is the female. And then they have the autosomal, which is everything in between. But they've been just making incredible breakthroughs.
You won't give me a test on that, will you?
But you know, along with DNA, you still have to do the good old-fashioned way. There are a lot of parish records that have not been copied. So sometimes you have to go to the, to the stand-down or to the, if there's an archive. When I went to Germany in '99, my friend's father works for BMW Motorcycle Division, and I was able to go up to my ancestral village, which is up on the Hessen and Thuringen border, the former East, and it was an incredible experience, and I had been corresponding with a lady who took me to the 3 churches where my family was from, but they had pulled all the church books because they were microfilming them. So I didn't get to look at any of the books. I had to wait 6 months to be able to pay for scans, and I had to pay pretty close to $800 to get all the scans that I wanted. And of course, I did 5 generations, everybody that was married and deaths and everything. So it was a pretty extended research project. And I'm really glad that I did the scans, because that archives will not let the Mormon Church photocopy them or copy them at this point. So they've restricted the Mormon Church from coming in and doing rescanning of all the records. So I was lucky to get them when I did. So, to be able to get records, you don't want to necessarily quibble about having to pay for them, because, it's expensive. Genealogy isn't for the faint of pocketbook. That's, it's a very hard process, but it can be very rewarding. Absolutely. And did I have any questions?
Did most of the Germans come to the East Coast by boat?
No. Nope. I had 3 families that came in through Galveston and Louisiana that came in from the south. So,
I'm aware of that. Someone told me that, but I was...
Well, a lot of the people came into to New York, Boston, but a lot of people came in from Canada, and a lot of people come in from the Gulf states, and a lot of people Canada was a huge area. And then they drop off. And then around the 1900, a lot of people came in from South America. So it's not definitive. I would say that probably 75% of my family did not come in from the East Coast. They came in from the South. So, yeah.
Yes, I've used Ancestry before, but how does it and Family Search compare and differ?
She asked how the difference is between Ancestry and FamilySearch.org. FamilySearch.org is putting on international records left and right. They both are going at such great speed. I still think that FamilySearch.org is pushing the envelope, because they're doing more international records. And, their members do transcriptions and indexing. So, as a matter of fact, anybody in this room could do indexing if you want to. When you make your account, you can do indexing yourself if you want to help. But Ancestry buys records, and they do have, Ancestry has, I think that they have a, they're in Provo. They're headquartered in Provo. They have one in Salt Lake. They have one in Ireland, in San Francisco, and they're putting in offices in different places. But still, I think they both rival each other. and they have a lot of similar records. So,
I had a question about Ellis Island. Are those records easily accessible? Or?
he had a question about the records in Ellis Island. Of course, Ellis Island is quite a bit later. I think that their records, Castle Garden starts like in the early 1890s. So, you know, a lot of people came through Ellis Island, and there's a website that is sponsored by Stephen Morris, and it is, if you want to know about Ellis Island records, that would be the one to access. It's an incredible undertaking, but don't get stuck on my family spelled my name this way, because they can, even Schmidt is spelled like 6 or 7 different ways. And you got to remember that we're not always the people that spell our own name. It's census takers, it's people in courthouses, it's people, and they may not be good spellers. So, and my own great-grandmother, her last name was Holtzhammer. So I've found it spelled so many different ways that I didn't even know it could be spelled that way.
Would the record keeping in neighboring European countries be similar to this, or?
The question was, would the European countries be similar? Their record keeper is very, very similar. It's just in a different language. And they do have restrictions. You know, you do have to be, you know, there are times when people are a little bit more willing to share stuff. For example, when I was in Germany, you can't look at German records when you're in Germany in some of the family history centers. And, you know, there are different, like when I came up against the Lutheran archives that was in Eisenach, that they were not allowing the Mormon church to come and microfilm their records, yet I could pay for the records. So, you know, and you really have to keep digging away to see who has the records, because a lot of people think that things aren't available, that it was bombed and burnt up. There's so many records that are available. There really are a lot more records available than people think. You know, there's certain areas that were pretty worn-torn, like Bremerhaven, you know, or Berlin. You know, some of the areas took a worse beating, but there are so many records that are available. And people uncover records all the time. Yes?
Which is the best website to go to or search engine to go to find U.S. 1700 and 1600?
I think that he asked which is the best website for records out of the 1700s. I don't think that there's really a good website for. It just depends on what area you're working in, and I would access the best archive in their card catalog for the area that you're working in. For example, let's say that you were working in Virginia. I would go to the Virginia State Archives and Library. It's a wonderful place. They have a great card catalog. It's, let's say that you were in Maryland, the Maryland Historical Society. And there's a lot of the periodicals that are published that come out every month with different websites. You know, some of the, I think that Family Tree just came out with an article about the 75 top websites, and the archives in Washington was one of them. So, you know, I think that you have to narrow it down to the area that you're working in to see what records are available, because they're going to have the best idea in their area what's available. Did that answer?
Do I have to go to Missouri for all this background, or can I go to some of these sites here?
The Missouri State Archives has a wonderful website. I would get...
I have to go here in Washington, would I get some of that information?
Not from Missouri. You're going to have to go on they have a wonderful website. I've worked with Missouri records a lot. They have wonderful records on the archives. You know, we do face a lot of archives in this day and age with budget cuts, with government and stuff, a lot of archives, they're trying to close a lot of archives because of lack of staffing. So sometimes it's very hard to access records because of that. For example, Arizona was one that was almost fell under the knife, and Georgia. You know, so every state has their ills, but you know, you just got to keep chipping away at what records. And you know, we have different waves of Germans that came in, so depending on where you're looking, New York had a big wave in the 1600s, so of course the New York archives would be a place to start there.
You have a lot of Saints here or Mormon here?
Puget and U Street. We have a branch library. It's very nice up on Puget and U. They also have a very nice one up in Tacoma on, I think it's on 12th and Stevens, so right, or 12th and Pearl, excuse me. It's an even bigger one. So.
A lot of the German people went to Russia or the Ukraine in the 1700s, I think. And
the Volgas.
They came to Canada and the United States. Are there records there in the various places that are still available? Say,
I'm glad you asked. If you go to Concordia University in Portland, they have a specific research room that is dedicated just to the Germans from Russia, from the Volga area. I have done lectures for them. They have an incredible library there. And you can get on Facebook and just Germans to Russia, and just hook up with the Facebook. They're wonderful. Those guys will help you with anything.
You've done a lot of research of the Schmidt family, and then I'm sure you've run across other Tumwater area German ancestry. And what have you discovered as far as other German families here?
Well, there's a lot of them. Yeah. That's, I was mainly concentrating on the Schmidt family because it was just very interesting to me, and they've got an incredible archives here. But, you know, just access the records. We have the Washington State Archives. We have the availability of the birth, marriage, and death records. We have court records, just an incredible amount of records. So if you're doing German ancestry here in the area, please come down to the archives and look us up, because we can help you get started. You can look in the deed records. And
is the archives synonymous with the State Historical Society?
No.
It isn't. So there's two different.
Yeah. Yeah, the Historical Society is up in Tacoma.
Yeah, from Missouri I was running into that. I didn't know. But I'm just saying.
Like I said, finding the archives or the repository that has your records. You know, here we're standing in the repository for the Schmidt family. They have an incredible amount of information, and I would suggest go through all your family records first, because you can find an incredible wealth of information in your family records. You know, it's like I said at the beginning, that wonderful family tree that they have for the Schmidts with their little coat of arms on it is just wonderful. You know.
Are there genealogy detectives that hire themselves out to do all that labor?
Yes, and if you get a little bit afraid and need some help, if you get on the Association of Professional Genealogists, you can hire somebody that is versed in that area. And there's people that work in every state, and I have colleagues that I could set you up with. Like I was telling the gentleman, the repository down in Portland for the Germans from Russia, because we have a lot of Germans from Russia in eastern Washington. And they settled all over, but a lot of them migrated down in the Vancouver area and over into eastern Washington. That's kind of like all the Norwegian people over in Poulsbo, you know. People always kind of migrate to an area. You know, we have Leavenworth, you know, where we have the German community. So there's a lot of them that came over. We have the Swiss that settled down in Francis. They take up pretty much all of Francis. So they have a lot of German background too.
What was the start of the Schmidt family with the brewery? Because I have Anheuser-Busch. They started the brewery. Is that right?
Yeah.
How did they do that? Was that there when they? He's laughing.
Well, yeah. Leopold went to school in Germany, and one of the fascinating things that I'm going to close with is there's a couple of books down in the archives here of all of his little things on the brewery that he learned about brewing malt and temperatures, degrees, everything that had to do with brewing, and he pretty much brought it to the area. You know, he was in Montana in the late 1880s and then came here and started brewing here. But he went to school in Germany to learn the brewing business, and all his school books are down. So.
Well, it's interesting because I grew up in the bush, Anheuser-Busch, and as a little boy I thought the only thing was the Clydesdales.
No, it's the water.
All right, Jewell Dunn. And we don't want to see a fist fight between the Schmidts and the Anheisers here. But anyway, this is great. Thank you so much for coming. And next month, Dave Nicandry will be here and speaking about Captain Cook and the voyages of Captain Cook. And so we hope you'll come for that. And also take advantage of our guided house tours of the Schmidt House with Bob Krim. December 8th is our next one of those. And he has 60 years worth of stories of his caretaking of the house and the Schmidt family. All right, thanks so much for coming. We still have some cookies and fattening things back there, so feel free to take advantage of that, and thank you for coming again.